Imagine standing on a high stone wall, looking out at the endless blue horizon of the Mediterranean Sea. The sun is beating down on your armor, and the heat is unbearable. But the heat is the least of your worries. On the horizon, you see sails, not just 10 or 20, but hundreds of them. The sea is literally turning white with canvas. This is the entire might of the Ottoman Empire, the superpower of the world, heading straight for you. And you are stuck on a tiny, dry rock in the middle of the ocean with no way to escape. The year is 1565. The location is the island of Malta, and what is about to happen here isn't just a battle. It is a fight for survival that will decide the future of Europe. It is a story of 30,000 soldiers against a few hundred knights who refuse to kneel. It is a story where the impossible actually happened. Welcome to the Great Siege of Malta. To understand why this battle was so intense, we first have to understand the two sides. On one side, we have the Ottoman Empire, led by Suleiman the Magnificent. At this time, the Ottomans were unstoppable. They had conquered Constantinople, swept through the Balkans, and controlled the eastern Mediterranean. Suleiman was tired of the Christian pirates raiding his trade ships, and he wanted to open the door to invade Italy and Rome itself. To do that, he needed Malta. On the other side, we have the Knights of St. John, also known as the Knights Hospitable. These weren't your average soldiers. They were warrior monks. They were religious men, but they were trained to kill. They had been kicked out of their home in Rhodes years earlier by the same sultan, and now they were making their last stand on Malta. Their leader was Jean de Valette, a 71-year-old Grand Master who was as tough as old leather. He knew the Ottomans were coming, and he knew there would be no mercy. When the Ottoman fleet arrived in May, it was a terrifying sight. They brought around 30,000 to 40,000 fighting men, including the elite Janissaries, special forces of their day. De Valette had only about 700 knights and maybe 6,000 local Maltese militia and Spanish soldiers. The numbers were ridiculous. It should have been over in a week. The Ottomans decided to attack a small fort called Elmo first. This fort guarded the entrance to the harbor. The Ottoman commanders thought, we'll crush this little fort in 3 or 4 days, then move on to the main castles. They were wrong. The defenders inside Elmo fought like demons. The Turks bombarded the walls day and night with massive cannons. They launched wave after wave of attacks, but every time the smoke cleared, the knights were still there. They used everything they had. They poured boiling oil and melted pitch on the attackers climbing the ladders. This is where the battle got truly horrific. The knights used a weapon called wildfire, or hoops of fire. These were wooden hoops wrapped in cloth, dipped in brandy and flammable chemicals, set on fire, and tossed onto the enemy. The hoops would hook onto the flowing robes of the Ottoman soldiers, turning them into living torches. It was a nightmare. Days turned into weeks. The 3-day conquest of St. Elmo lasted for a whole month. The water turned red with blood. Eventually, the sheer number of Ottoman troops was too much. St. Elmo fell. The Ottomans were furious at how many men they had lost for such a tiny fort. In a rage, the Ottoman commander, Mustafa Pasha, had the bodies of the dead knights decapitated, nailed 2 wooden crosses, and floated across the harbor to terrify the remaining defenders. But Jean de Valette didn't get scared. He got angry. He ordered his own cannons to fire the heads of his Turkish prisoners back at the Ottoman camp. The message was clear. There will be no surrender. No one is leaving this island alive. Now, the Ottomans turned their attention to the main forts, Sanglia and Burgu. This was the main event. The fighting that followed was some of the most brutal in human history. It was the height of summer. The heat on Malta in July and August is suffocating. Men were fighting in heavy armor under a blazing sun, dying of thirst as much as from sword wounds. The Ottomans tried to attack from the sea and the land at the same time. They even tried to swim across the harbor with axes to chop down the defensive stakes the knights had planted underwater. The Maltese people themselves joined the fight. Even women and children were on the walls, throwing rocks and boiling water down on the invaders. There is a fascinating strategic element here. If you look at the maps and troop movements often analyzed in documentaries like the Great Siege of Malta 1565, you can see how the Ottomans slowly choked the supply lines, trying to starve the knights out. but the maps do you show the smell of sickness in the camps, or the desperation in the eyes of the men. By August, both sides were exhausted. The Ottomans were running out of food and gunpowder. Dysentery was spreading through their camp, killing thousands. They were losing morale. They had expected an easy victory, not a meat grinder. Inside the walls, the knights were in even worse shape. They were starving. De Valette was wounded in the leg, but he refused to leave the front line. He stood on the broken walls, sword in hand, telling his men that heaven was waiting for them, but they had to take as many enemies with them as possible. The turning point came in early September. A small relief force had landed earlier, but it wasn't enough. However, rumors started spreading in the Ottoman camp that a massive Christian army was arriving from Sicily. Panic set in. Mustafa Pasha, the Ottoman commander, looked at his dying army. He had lost perhaps half of his men to fighting and disease. Winter was coming, and the seas would soon be too rough to sail home. On September 7th, the Great Relief Force finally arrived from Sicily. It wasn't huge a boat, 8,000 men, but for the Ottomans, it was the final straw. They thought it was much larger. Broken and demoralized, the mighty Ottoman army packed up their tents, boarded their ships, and sailed away. When the dust settled, Malta was a ruin. The forts were smashed to gravel, but the flag of the knights still flew. They had done the impossible. They had stopped the unstoppable force. The aftermath of this siege changed everything. It shattered the myth that the Ottomans were invincible. It gave hope to all of Europe. Jean de Valette became a hero across the continent. The city of Valletta, the capital of Malta today, was built and named after him. The Siege of Malta reminds us that numbers aren't everything. Determination, leadership, and the will to survive can overcome even the wildest odds. It was a clash of civilizations, a month of fire and blood, where a few hundred men held the line against an empire. Thank you for listening to this incredible story of survival. Stories like these are why we look back at the past to see what humans are capable of when their backs are against the wall. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, please give the video a like and hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep the fires of the past burning. This is HistoryHearth, signing off.